In today's video, I'm going to show you how to draw the superhero cape. If you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started. Alright, so for a quick warm-up activity or something to think about before we go into this, I'm going to keep this really basic. And if we think about an initial pinch point and then lines radiating from there, I'm going to draw these overly straight and stiff, but keep in mind you're going to vary those up greatly. And then just a little bit of a wave, you could think of hills and valleys or lasagna noodles, whatever you want to picture there. And then a little bit of shadow to help define the forms. And that's the basic principle of what we're going to do today. Okay, so when we utilize the techniques I just showed you over the top of some existing forms, in this case the back of a superhero, we're going to need to develop those a bit differently, right? Explore some different ways of doing it. So we're still going to utilize the pinch points at the top, that's what those little X's are, and then the curved, I'll just say lasagna noodle down at the bottom, and we need to connect those. So right now I'm showing you a couple different ways to explore the idea or ideas of the way that the line would curve at the bottom, but really I'm just trying to feel that out because very rarely do I draw it exactly the way it needs to be in the first instance, and I want this feeling of variation and energy and flow to that. Now from there I'm going to connect those wavy lines to the pinch points up top, and I need to also make sure that I explore some other ideas, I'll say going horizontally through the cape, but also the curved lines that go from the pinch points down to those wavy lines. They need to have a bit of flow and randomness and overlap and different things going on there. But that's where I think it's important to first explain to you the very basic ideas, the very basic principles of all this. And then you explore these ideas further as you build up confidence. Just keep in mind, you can keep them very simplified in the beginning stages, and then just slowly grow your knowledge of drawing wrinkles and folds. And there's really no other way other than to draw lots and lots of wrinkles and folds. It's just kind of a complex thing to wrap your head around. At least it was for me. It still is at times. But the only way to get past that is to draw lots of various clothing types and different fabrics and materials, both rigid and soft. Now, another common mistake you'll see, and you might have in your own work, and I know I've definitely battled this from time to time, is making the material look too stiff. In fact, I would say that even at this stage, the material still looks a tiny bit stiff in areas. I'm okay with it. I think that an over stylized version like this is fine. It's a little almost cartoony, but keep in mind that if you want less stiffness in that material, you're going to either generate more folds, we'll say per square inch or something like that, and or in and onto themselves. So you have to think about the material and the energy flowing through it. So I absolutely love Burne Hogarth's book, Dynamic Wrinkles and Drapery. He does some gorgeous, breathtaking examples in that book. And I really recommend it for anybody that's trying to grow their knowledge in this area. But one of the things he talks a lot about is the kinetic energy through the materials. And you have to understand a bit of that if you want it to translate. And a big part of it is allowing that energy to flow through the material. So for instance, if you're drawing like a leather boot, that's going to be very different than a sheet of polyester or satin or something like that. So that's where those studies are very important, to pay attention to the things that you see, and then do your own stylized version of it, and try to translate that information. But again, it's really pushing the amount of wrinkles that you see in a certain area, but also the curvature of the wrinkles. So, allowing these lines to be very organic and bend in and around themselves and things like that. So obviously right here I'm just doing some rendering, but I kind of like the fact that the arm is so rigid compared to the fabric, because that's another thing that's very important, is getting the different materials in your illustration so that some things read hard and some read soft. And because of that comparison, it can really help you. It can really help you to say, okay, this is definitely a soft material because you've got something by contrast that is very stiff and overly rigid. So I'm purposely doing that with the arms, going with a lot more angles, or arm, I should say. You barely see the other arm. And then also, I thought it was nice to be able to put it in front of the cape a little bit and create a little bit of depth, even for this basic illustration. So as I render into the cape, I'm going to try to use some line weight and push these ideas a little bit further, get some overlaps from the material, the smaller folds up top, radiating downwards into larger billowing shapes. But at this point, it's a lot more just line weight. But I am still thinking very much about the curvature of those lines as I throw those in. So again, it's thinking about these concepts as you illustrate. It's obviously almost, it goes without saying, right? You think about the things that you're drawing, but you want to really pay attention to that. So when you're trying to get something to look soft and flowing and billowing, what are you going to do? You're going to throw lines that have more curve if they're too straight and too stiff. And I would say even with the line weight, if the line weight is too consistently the same, it might take a little bit of that life out of that bend and flow, where you can definitely push that a bit further by using the line weight to thicken up on areas that are not just coming out towards camera, but also that are, have more bend to them. So yeah, there's all sorts of ways to explain the forms when you do that. But again, I really think that paying attention to throwing the lines and going for something softer with more curves is going to help explain these forms a bit more clearly. Another thing I tend to think about, especially when connecting some of these points together, is I tend to think about these folds almost like I would think about perspective lines. So the pinch points would be similar to a vanishing point, and then obviously you're not going to create too many straight lines like you would in perspective drawing, but it's a similar concept. So I definitely think of that as I'm doing this part. And then now implementing some heavier shadows just to push those forms around a bit more. Thinking about the light source and then trying to imagine where the shadow might be cast from the larger folds. And I'm starting overly straight with the points or the pointed ends of the shadows, and be careful of that because that's a bad habit to get into. I definitely find myself doing that a little too much with drapery, with capes and wrinkles and folds. So I have to usually go back and soften that up, like either render out the points or just try to make them look and feel a bit more organic by rounding over some of the edges. And again, you're not leaving so many sharp points. It can be a bit distracting. And so watching this now, I can definitely see that more clearly. And you can see right there, I start to break off some of those points with just little bits of rendering. I didn't really want to render this one very heavily because I wanted to show you how it works in a more basic way without the rendering. But yeah, so cast shadows, drop shadows, whatever you can envision there, and you see it starts to separate some of those wrinkles and folds, makes them look a bit more dimensional. Also with the two pinch points, just pay special attention when you do your studies and your practice activities that you do get a bit of sagging of the material between those at times. And I'm going to reference Burne Hogarth's book again because he's got some excellent examples of that. So if you look at the way he explains those pinch points and those bits of drapery folding in those areas, it's just beautiful stuff, and it's great examples to learn and grow from. I'll admit they're a bit advanced for some people's taste, as far as copying and learning in that regard. But it gives you a nice range of where you can take this stuff and how good you can get. So I definitely recommend it. So now going back and adjusting the line weight, I started to realize that it was just too evenly arranged. and I don't like that, especially with this type of work. I feel like the line weight can do so much more if you really push and pull that aspect of it. So really play around with the line weight, and couple that with the way you want the shadows to work, and generally you can make the artwork look more interesting. So that'll bring this one to a close. I'd love to know what you think, as well as what you'd like to see on the channel in the future. So please let me know. As always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and bye for now.